Each weekday, Monday through Friday, we'll be here, right here at this place in Facebook, providing parenting discussions. Not just any discussions. I'll be sharing with you vast experience that I've acquired over 30 years of teaching parents how to raise children. Children who feel loved and who are loving and responsible. We're not here to manage kids. We're here to help kids be happy. And you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and hear answers. I'll begin each essentially parenting homeschooling lesson for you with an introduction of some kind. Might be 20 seconds, might be 3 minutes. But it's just to get things going so that you settle in, so you write down your questions, so that you send them to the moderator. I don't care if the following discussion has anything to do with my introduction. That part's up to you. There is no job more important than being a parent. Not kidding. The entire world's condition, in fact, at any given moment, is almost entirely the result of how we have performed as parents and how our parents raised us and how their parents raised them. The world is not determined by epidemics, wars, technology, politics. The condition of the world, with rare and intermittent exceptions, is determined by the choices made by people who are all products of their childhoods. And it's parents who determine what childhood's going to be like. What we do as parents is heroic, world-changing, or at least it can be. And it's quiet and nearly secret in the privacy of our homes. We can make the world a happy, glorious place, or we can produce children with problems that never end, as many of you already know, which results in a world that has problems that never end. The world is nothing more than a reflection of how we parent. Memorize that. The world is a result of how we parent our children. You want the first option, a happy world. You have the capacity to become a hero in the world. Now, just for a second, let me tell you about a hero, a real hero, what the world would call a hero. In 1983, there was a man named Stanislav Yevgrafovich Petrov, and he was a duty officer at a Soviet command center whose job was to detect ballistic missiles coming in from NATO countries. The system reported that 6 missiles had just been launched from the United States, and protocol dictated that Petrov report this to his military superiors. This happened only 3 weeks after the Soviets had shot down a civilian flight with a U.S. congressman on board. So East-West tensions were crackling. And if Petrov had sent his report, historians believe that it's highly likely that the Soviets would have ordered a nuclear counterstrike. But Petrov was an experienced engineer and expert in the field of nuclear warfare. So he decided, this one man, quietly on his own, that the alarm was false, which it turned out to be. So he didn't report the supposed launch from the United States. Years later, as documents became declassified and available, we learned about this incident, and many experts declared that this one man likely prevented a large-scale nuclear war and therefore probably has saved more people's lives than anybody in history, all because he made a choice instead of reacting to fear. Almost every day, parents have such opportunities to be quiet heroes. Our children often behave in ways that seem like multiple missile launches, but if we properly understand what's happening with them, we can love and teach them instead of launching our own retaliatory strikes that end up in greatly escalated conflicts, unhappy families, and wounded children. Children who behave badly are in pain every time. People don't just suddenly behave badly, and they're in pain almost uniformly because they don't feel enough unconditional love in their lives. They're either getting attention, which is a substitute for unconditional love, or they're protecting themselves from perceived threats, ballistic missile launches. They need our love and guidance. As you participate in these daily parenting discussions, you will grow in your ability to give them what they need. So now, I take your questions and we go from here.
No questions have been submitted so far. Oh, check your email.
Donna, my wife Donna, is over here bossing me around, which is like normal. Here's a question. And we'll give you an example of the kind of question. Well, actually, you can ask any darn question you want to. This question says, my 5-year-old daughter, Rachel, got upset and threw what she had in her hand, which kids do, whatever they have in their hand, a toy, a glass. Fortunately, they don't handle axes a lot. She threw whatever she had in her hand and hit her brother and cut his nose. And it just happens that I saw the photograph of this. And here's this nice little slice across her younger brother's nose. He looked little, I don't know, 2 or 3 or something. And I'm not sure how to teach her to feel bad for being mean. So, first principle, never teach a child to feel bad. Guilt motivates children for moments. If you want to get a child to move really quickly, using anger and guilt and obligation will get the child to move. But you won't be raising a happy child. It doesn't happen. So what do you want to do? You want to do what I talk about in the ridiculously effective parenting training, which you can see on realloveparents.com. Over and over again, our response to children is to love and teach. I could just stop right there, and that's the entire subject of the 45 hours of training that you get on that site. It's just love and teach. All the rest of the site and all the rest of the stuff that I'm going to be teaching you is how to love, how specifically, very directly, how to be loving and how to teach them important principles that will revolutionize their lives. So first thing is loving. Learning how to communicate that you care about a child is something that we learn to do better for an entire lifetime. But there is something that we can do to communicate the first step of loving, which is to eliminate all the unloving steps, all the unloving obstacles. So the very first thing we need to learn, picture, we're right there. Child pitches this toy. There's blood running down the kid's face. And what's our initial reaction? We explode in some way. The kid launched a missile, literally, and then we launch a missile back by going, what have you done? Or how many times have I told you not to? You hear my reaction? Do you hear my tone of voice? Is there any way in this wide world that as I speak to you in that tone of voice, or to a child or to anybody, that you could feel like I care primarily about your happiness? Zero. None. So what's the first step? Never, ever speak to a child in anger. Never speak to a child in fear. Never speak to a child in a way that's protecting yourself. Any hyper emotion that comes up in the moment, this is a clue, is never love. You'll never see somebody when something falls and breaks or they're hit or bumped. You never see somebody automatically and in a hyper-reactive way respond with, oh, thank you. I care about you. It's absurd to say. So first step, calm, baby. And if you have to stop and take a breath and the blood's running down the kid's nose, the kid is not going to exsanguinate, in other words, die of blood loss. In the 2 seconds that you take to just go, be cool, shut your mouth. So you reach over and you take care of the bloody kid's nose. And while you've got the cloth on the bloody kid's nose and you're calming that kid, then you bring over the assailant, the person who threw the toy. And you say, so what happened? And it's very common, of course, for the assailant to blame the other person. Well, I threw the toy because he, and you say, no, what did you do? Well, I'm not mad at you. Everything changes when the kid gets that you're not angry. So what did you do? I'll help you. Did you climb up on the back of an elephant? Now, this sounds ridiculous. It's supposed to be. When you're playing with a child and offering ridiculous choices, it makes it much easier for them to trust that you're not going to be angry at them. I'm giving you a trick in loving and teaching, if you like. So what did you do? I'll give you two choices. Did you climb up on the back of an elephant? No. And usually by now the child is smiling, which puts you in a place where they're going to hear you. So you didn't get on the back of an elephant. Did you throw a toy at Jimmy, whatever his name was? Yeah. You say, were you being kind and loving? Well, yes or no. Were you being kind and loving? And then they'll hang their head, usually. No. You say, you don't need to hang your head. Listen to the tone with which I'm saying this. You don't need to hang your head. You threw a toy, and then what happened? It hurt somebody else, didn't it? Is that a good thing to do? Would you like it? I'm just giving you some sample questions. I'm not giving you the way to handle this. I'm giving you multiple choice. Would you like it if I did this to you? Well, clearly not. So was it a good choice to throw the toy at Jimmy? No, it wasn't. So it was not loving. It was not a good choice. You cut somebody in their forehead. If you'd hit him in the eye, it could have been considerably worse. So not a good choice. And you are not a bad person. So you're not bad. It just wasn't a good choice. So now, what choice could you have made instead? And then, then the choice algorithm just branches out. It turns out that Jimmy took something from the assailant who threw the toy, and you work out a way that the Rachel is the name of the 5-year-old, that Rachel could have handled this that wouldn't have resulted in her brother's blood running down his face. But you work out the solution only because the child feels loved by you. That's why it's called loving and teaching. This, by the way, applies to children from 5 to 55. We're made to feel guilty for our mistakes. And now we're so occupied with feeling guilty and feeling bad, then we escalate our defending ourselves, and it's just like the ballistic missiles. She throws a missile, you throw one at her, she throws them back at you, and before long, we're all just throwing missiles, and nobody even remembers what the original problem was, and we certainly don't get to a solution. Politicians who are adults, well, at least in name, don't do this one bit better than the 5-year-old, because we don't know how to love and teach. And that's why we're here. Hang on. Windows is saying, would you like to update me right now? Not so much, no. You have a question?
No, there's a question that I sent you. It got sent twice, but it's just one question.
I don't. We're going to perfect this. We're sending them right now by email, but what we're going to do in the future is probably Skype message so that they go back and forth and it's faster and easier. So here is a lady who says, with the children home now during the coronavirus. How do we explain the confinement to our children? Watching TV is scary. Oh, I know. Now, I was a physician for 20 years. I worked in emergency rooms for 6 years. I read easily 8 to 10 articles on coronavirus every single day, mostly just so I stay informed for myself and for our family. And in case somebody should ask me a question, don't claim to be an expert. And this is information for you. We'll get to how you explain this to your kids in a minute. Every single year, far more people die from, the seasonal flu every year than coronavirus is even approaching. So what scares people is that there's less known about it, less known about its pattern, less known about its incubation period, less known about the unknown scares us. And so you can say to children, you can vary the words according to the age of the child. You explain to the children that when a child has an obvious infectious disease, like most children are familiar with pink eye, for example, or having a cold or the flu, you don't go to school because those little itty bitty teeny, and you can pull it up on the internet, pictures of germs and viruses and stuff. Every time you touch somebody, every time you sneeze, every time you cough, these things spray out by the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, into the air in little droplets, and you spread the disease to somebody else. And so it's not a good idea to go to school when you have a cold or the flu or pink eye or smallpox. Don't say that. I have a bizarre sense of humor that you'll get used to. But you can say to them, and the reason that we're staying home from school is that this particular little bug, this little virus, is a lot like a cold. In fact, a whole lot like a cold. But we don't know as much about it. And more people, if you were to infect 100 people with a cold, or let's make it the flu, depends on the age group, but you might get one person die out of 100 people who get the flu. With this virus, we don't know as much about it. And so as many as 2, 3, 4, the numbers somewhere around 5, people can get really, really sick. Now, you don't have to use the word dead. With an older child, they would understand. The mortality rate is higher. But with a little child, you just go, they get really sick and end up in the hospital, and it's really bad for them. And so you just explain that this is a new virus, that viruses change the way they're made up. You can look up about coronavirus and look up things like RNA and how it makes strands, and you say the strands get mixed up, little parts get snipped off and get modified, and it becomes a new virus. This one's new. And so we're staying home until we know more about it so that we don't get infected with something that could end up being more serious than we thought. So when we stay at home, we have nothing to worry about, but we are going to follow the guidelines of the doctors who say, stay home. Don't go visit your friends without telling somebody. Don't go off on your bike and say, oh, well, I took the bike from home. Any of you who have parents of kids are going to recognize this. Well, but I took the bike from the garage, so I thought I was still on part of home. They come up with the reasons. You say, you stay in the house. You don't ever open the door and go anywhere without talking to me first. We're a little more careful than we would have been in the past. And so, like, if we get a box from UPS or FedEx or whatever, we'll probably wipe it down, because this little virus is proven to be a stubborn little stinker and can live, they've demonstrated this, can stay alive for as long as they think maybe 24 hours on cardboard, even longer on hard surfaces like desktop or a countertop or whatever. But we just need to be careful until we have more information so that we don't get sick with something that is unknown. Do you know what the most important thing is that I've told you in this entire discussion of coronavirus? My tone of voice. I'm explaining it to you. I'm not holding anything back. With older children, we say mortality rate, but it's an unknown. So we're just going to be cautious. But what we're not going to be is afraid. We're here at home precisely so we don't have to be afraid. It's going to turn out, and I'm not saying they're handling this wrong. I am not, because they've got to stop this. But it's going to turn out that people's fear of the illness is going to cause more overall harm, possibly even deaths, than the virus itself. We'll see whether that prediction turns out to be true, but nothing goes better when you add fear to it. Everything gets worse. And I have a new question. We are going to use Skype Messenger next time. It's easier than doing this. This is from a mother who says, my 14-year-old refuses any advice and chooses, I think, to come home. And chooses to come home late from school every day. He hangs out with his friends because it's boring at home. I've heard that word before. He will be starting to take his college entrance exams from country to country. They call it all kinds of different things next year. And he doesn't seem to understand that studying is vital to pass his exams. He doesn't listen to any advice and argues all the time. How do my husband and I get this message across to him without arguing? Okay, so this would be a really classic place where I would say go to realloveparents.com and take the ridiculously effective parenting training. But I'm not here to pitch stuff. I'm here to give you real answers. It takes real courage to be a parent. I mean, we're talking about real guts. In today's world, as opposed to even 20 years ago, there was an article recently, a cover article in Time magazine, that was called The Age of Entitlement. Kids now believe that if they can think of a thing, or if their friends are doing a thing, then they get to do that thing. If they can think of it, they get to do it. If their friends are doing it, if their friends get a car, then they get a car. They feel entitled. And why wouldn't they? Because see, as little as 20 years ago, they didn't have access to even the internet. We didn't have cell phones until 20 years ago. I know, it's like, you're kidding. Not. And so now they have access to seeing what everybody else demonstrates on Facebook and other social media and Instagram and Twitter. And I got the latest i55 phone. I got a new car, and that's what they hear all day long. What other people got, what their clothing is like, what their makeup is like, how they look like when they've been photoshopped, and they compare themselves to that. And well, if they're going to keep up with their friends, then they've got to have that too. And so your son is going, well, I'm just going to goof around at school and do what's fun. Oh, this is a short answer to a really short version of a really very long answer. You have to be the parents. It takes courage. You have to be willing to say to your 14-year-old son, we're learning a smarter way of parenting. You say, our bad. We made a mistake. We have just done nothing while you're not preparing for these exams that pretty much are going to determine your earning power for the rest of your life. If you don't study for these exams and the time comes when you go, man, I'm going to get me a car, you're going to discover that when you work for minimum wage, you ain't going to get a car at all. You can't afford to insure it. You can't afford to buy it. You can't afford to keep tires on it. You can't afford you can't afford spit. Oh, and turns out you can't afford a house either. And since once you leave here when you're 18, you can't stay here. It's going to turn out that these tests are going to be pretty pivotal for the rest of your life. They don't determine your worth as a human being. Got that? Not everybody is made for college. But in the meantime, until you figure out what you really want to do, even almost all of the people who didn't finish college went there. They at least got ready to and then discovered what they wanted to do. So here are the new rules, and you're going to have to come up with these. And in subsequent parenting discussions, I'd be only too happy to give you some suggestions. But you will be at home on time. You will have a studying for your entrance exam period of time set up every day the day before. So if today's Wednesday, on Wednesday we'll set up I'm going to make this up, but the 3 hours that you're going to be studying for your exams, and not just studying for them in your room, like having the book open while you're listening to music. No, you're going to be studying for your exam and show us what you did. And we're going to be following your grades online. Almost everybody's grades are posted online all over the world these days. And if you decide not to, because you always get to choose not to study. But see, here's where we've made our mistake. I'm speaking like I was you to your son. I think it says son. No, it just says 14. Yeah, to your son. It's been my mistake that I have allowed you to make your own choices, which is a good thing. But then what happens is, along with making your own choices, you have to assume all responsibilities for the choices that you make. And boy, that's where we blew it. So you would not study, and then we would just go, well, what can we do? And we didn't make you responsible. So until you're keeping this schedule meticulously, you won't be doing anything else. So you won't have your phone. You won't have access to any electronic devices. You will not be coming home late. You will be home by 4:07 p.m. every day, however many minutes it takes to get from home to school to home. You're not going to go anyplace with your friends. You're not going to be watching television. The rule essentially is work before play. Now, again, listen to my tone. I'm not saying this is what you're going to do, and that's launching ballistic missiles, and he's going to launch ballistic missiles back at you. So you just say, this is how it's going to be from now on. You can't take my phone. Yeah, actually, it's our phone. And if you decide to keep your phone, you can, but we'll simply call the carrier and disconnect your phone. So you won't have access to anything. And as you will read on the parenting sites, so we have reallove.com, we have realloveparents.com, you'll see that if a child doesn't respond to just taking the phone, and 80% of kids do respond to taking their phone, then you start escalating the consequences. I talked to a mother just today who took the phone from her child, and the child, of course, borrowed other people's phones. I know how this goes. I've heard every story there is. If you can send me a new one, I'd be fascinated. Then she started removing the electronic device. She started removing the free time to do the things that she wanted to do. She couldn't go to parties. She couldn't participate in the after-school sports team that she was on. And then eventually she lost her room, and this child now sleeps outside. This is a 17-year-old kid. This child sleeps outside in a tent in the backyard. And the kid is starting to pay attention. It took the removal of everything. Now, for those of you who are thinking, well, this sounds like a harsh punishment. No, it's not a punishment. If the child doesn't study at school, doesn't do well on the exams, ignores every authority figure who says, here's what you need to do, How do you think that's going to work when they try to go to college, when they try to get a job, when they're going to be sleeping in a tent? So you tell them, I'm preparing you now for how the world is going to impose consequences when you don't do what is required of you. The difference is, I really care about you as I apply these consequences. The world doesn't. The world will mercilessly crush you like a bug when you don't satisfy the criteria to enter this particular door. In other words, to get a job, or this particular door, to earn a particular income, or to enter this particular school. They will not say, oh, you poor thing. You were playing with your friends. Well, who wouldn't want to play with their friends? Why don't you come to our school? And we don't really care whether you've studied or prepared or anything, because we'll teach you reading and writing, when you get here. No, there are no schools like that. Maybe when you're in the second grade, but not when it's time to go to school. So you're getting an overall feel, and like I say, you're welcome to ask follow-up questions, and we can answer them on a subsequent parenting discussion. You really have to step up and be the parents. It won't be easy. The child who's involved never thanks you, never says, oh gosh, Mom, thanks for thinking of my future, and thanks for imposing these consequences. In fact, they tend to curse and scream and say terrible things to you. And you can't react with anger. As soon as you become irritated or afraid, the discussion is done. And now we're lobbing missiles, and everybody loses. That's why the actual name for countries protecting each other with missiles is called mutually assured destruction, and it works in parenting too.
Good question.
Good
The most
question.
recent one that's got an additional.
This is a lot of stuff to hear for the first time. I'm quite aware. How do we keep the peace between my two kids who are under 3 without the television on? Be a parent. Now, I'm not being smart mouth when I say that. It's our job not just to put a roof over their head and to feed them. It's our job to educate them, to teach them principles, to teach them how to be kind to each other, to teach them how to be loving, to teach them how to be responsible. So how do you keep the peace? You don't keep the peace. You keep them busy doing good things. If the goal is just to keep the peace, well, I could just go through my neighborhood and shoot everybody in the head, and there would be peace. Nobody would bother me at all. Peace isn't the object. The absence of conflict isn't the same as happiness. So you would spend the day, and this is going to require effort on your part, where you teach them how to do things like clean up the kitchen, even though they're under 3 years old. If a child can stack 2 blocks on top of each other, which happens at about 11, 12 months, roughly. If a child can stack 2 blocks, a child can put things away. And you can teach them how to do them. By age 3, they can wash the dishes easily. Now, they're a little sloppier than you are, and they're certainly slower, but you teach them household chores. You use the internet to teach them things about the world, to teach them things about life. You read out of the Real Love in Parenting book, which they will understand at age 3. No kidding, which is really inexpensive. For a few dollars, you can download the Kindle version off the reallove.com site. It's constant teaching. You can also provide them activities. I can never remember the name of that site. What's the site?
Pinterest.
Thank you. Although I have never visited it personally, it's a little embarrassing, I am constantly recommending the site Pinterest. Why? Because on Pinterest, you can type in anything that has to do with children, and instead of you having to come up with things on your own, it'll give you 1,000 possibilities or more. So if you write down activities at home for 3-year-olds, you will be inundated by a tidal wave of clever ideas. Things to do with glue and paper and popsicle sticks, and help your kids be creative. You'll discover that one kid's an artist, one kid's a natural structural engineer, another kid is. So it's not about keeping peace. It's providing a stimulating, active, thriving environment so that kids actually live productively, not just keep the peace. And if they do argue, then again, read Real Love and Parenting, or go to realloveparents.com, learn how to teach them how to be loving and responsible. Because if kids are loving and responsible, they don't even have an inclination to squabble. There's no peace to keep. It's a much more proactive and productive way to raise kids.
That same writer had an example of.
Is it in here?
Mm-hmm.
Same writer has an example. Keep above that, I'm hoping. Here we go. My 2-year-old son yells, screams, pushes, and jumps on my 7-month-old when she tries to play near him. She won't even be doing anything near him sometimes, and he seems to look for her to hurt her. I try to be compassionate and give him a hug, and sometimes to tell him why he's hurting her. I would be curious to know what you tell him when you tell him why he's hurting her. But with my husband working from home, he freaks out right away and yells at our son. My husband would rather be watching TV all day to keep our daughter safe. I think he means he would rather the kid watch TV all day. I don't think it's necessary, but I don't know how to calm my husband down. I want to freak out too. I know it's the last thing our son needs. So we already talked about this. You're going to provide him it's a combination of the answer I already gave and the answer I gave about the 5-year-old Rachel who threw the toy and hit her brother. So first, you're going to fill his day with his own productive things to do. Then, if he still does something unkind, like pushes, jumps on your 7-month-old, which is not a really great idea, then you say to the child, even though he's only 2 and probably doesn't speak all that great, he understands what you say. And so you say, so was that a kind thing to do? I'm just giving you some sample questions. Would you like it if I got up on the couch and I jumped on you? You might, for example, stand up on the couch and simulate what that would look like, how frightening that would be. Would that be kind for you to do to your sister? So what could you do instead? Then the kid will never know the answer. So you have to show them that the 2-year-old can play with the 7-month-old, can dangle things above the 7-year-old's head while they're lying down, play with the child, or at the very least, keep themselves happy doing any number of productive things that you're going to find on Pinterest. But you have to have an absolutely zero tolerance for any kind of either emotional or physical violence for a 2-year-old to a 7-month-old. The disparity is way too big. And if you allow it, I've worked in emergency rooms long enough to see some pretty serious injuries inflicted by a 2-year-old kid on a baby. So it can't happen. And if the child does it repeatedly, which is not going to happen if you provide enough productive things to do, then you say, so everybody here in the room is being kind to each other. They're being quiet. Nobody's hurting each other. And if you want to be loud and hurtful, you can do that, but you have to do it alone in your room. And so you put him in his room and you say, you can come out. It's not like you put him in his room for 20 minutes or there are all kinds of tricks. You put him in for 2 minutes for each year he is old. No, you say, you can come out as soon as you're ready to behave in a kind way. If he comes out and behaves unkindly again, you say, well, now you're going to have to stay longer. Some parents will say, well, he'll come out of his room immediately. Oh my, there are so many ways to lock a door. You can reverse the lock and lock it from the outside. You can use a latch for a lock. And when I say lock a child in his room, a child only has to realize that he's being locked in his room, which they just hate, because it takes from them their ability to make their own choices. A child only has to be locked in a room and realize that he can't get out for 30 seconds, at which point they are screaming and sobbing. And then you open the door and say, so are you ready to come out and to be kind to your sister, or to resume finger painting, or whatever it is you're doing with the child? It takes far more effort in the beginning to parent a child in a loving way than to just simply throw them in the same room together and hope that they don't fight. It takes constructive effort, and there are oodles of ideas in the book and in the websites that I've mentioned so far. And it's also worth having a conversation with your husband that there has to be an absolutely zero tolerance in your family from now on, like from this second on, for anger. There can't be anger. Anger scares everybody. Anger screams, I don't love you, at everybody. So look at the irony of this. The 2-year-old is being angry and unkind to the 7-month-old. And then along comes the adult and with anger says, don't treat your sister like that. So we're fighting anger with anger, and the kid just simply learns, so the solution to everything is anger. We can't teach them about anger if we're being angry ourselves. We're almost always the root of the problems with our kids. Almost always, to the point of always. Any others? All right, so what we'll do is we're going to meet again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and have your questions written out. You might have some questions as a result of our conversation today. You can send your questions in ahead of time to
same group.
Just post them on the group, and Donna will collect them and we'll use them tomorrow. It's been a good start. It's the first day. We're just figuring things out. We'll be smarter the second day, and you'll have more questions. It's been a pleasure teaching you about parenting.